This episode is proudly supported by Crunch. Running a hospitality business isn't for the faint-hearted. Between ordering stock, scheduling rosters, paying bills, motivating your team, and keeping customers happy, there's a lot on your plate. It's no surprise that business planning often gets put on the back burner. Well, here's something that can help. Introducing Crunch, a new app to help simplify the business side of hospo. With Crunch, you get access to practical, bite-sized education, proven strategies, and a supportive community of hospo owners just like you. When it comes to the Crunch, if you're looking for proven ways to build a successful, sustainable business, Crunch has you covered. Try Crunch now. To get 14 days free, just head to crunchhospo.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wiradjuri Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
That's been a big focus for us, is putting energy back into the vines, and they've rewarded us a lot. The 22s were awesome to start, but 23 and 24, in my opinion, are better wines. And I think, the site will only continue to evolve and get better.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Jonathon Mattick is the viticulturist and winemaker for Canobolas Wines in Orange, New South Wales. Jonathon is a gentleman, a friend to many, and one of those people you know is good right to their core. In a very short time since launching Canobolas Wines, Jonathon has been doing great things with the humble grape. Hi, John. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Long time listener, first time caller kind of thing.
Yay! Now that's always good to hear. I try to get only the best personalities on this podcast, hence being delighted to chat to yourself. Let's go back in your little history and talk to me about where you were born and how you got to be in this wonderful place that you are now making wine.
So born in Sydney, grew up in Sydney, but kind of Western Sydney. We grew up on a bit of land out there, so still part of the Sydney metro, but some kind of rural landscape. So always had an interest in all things agricultural. But then went into school in the city and studied at university and did a business degree. And then always had a fascination with wine right through kind of my mid-20s, even after I finished my first degree. And that kind of culminated in trying to pursue something in the industry. I was inspired to do so a few different ways, but kind of left Sydney and moved to Wagga and did the degree at Charles Sturt. And for anyone who's ever done vintage or worked in a winery, it's really addictive, and it's a hard thing to give up. So I was hooked from my first vintage experience, and haven't looked back since.
So how did you know that that's kind of what you wanted to do? I mean, it sounds like you kind of just knew your calling straight off the bat, but was there any other degree that you thought about doing? Did you ever want to be a soccer superstar or a rock star?
Professional swimmer, maybe. I love swimming. So I used to do a lot of ocean swimming before moving to Orange. There's not much access to the ocean here. And loved the water. So definitely a water baby in my youth. Spent, every moment I could in a pool. But after school did a business degree and went into marketing for a while. So it wasn't really that apparent that I wanted to get into the wine industry. I had a fascination with wine and food. Really kind of was the gateway into wine. Actually, food was the first thing that kind of drew me to matching flavours. And when I was 25, I decided I didn't want to do marketing anymore and took a year off and travelled around the world. And I met my dad in Spain, and we walked across Spain on a walk called the Camino de Santiago, which you walk from France all the way to the western coast of Spain, which is about 800 kilometres. And on that walk, you pass through two big wine regions, Navarra and Rioja. And that was kind of the thing that cemented to me that I wanted to, one, be outdoors, and two, had a real passion for wine. So as soon as I got back, I started studying at Charles Sturt, and left Sydney. So that was the thing that drew me to it.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing thing to do with your father. Tell me about that trip, because I've seen people on travel channels do it, but what was it? Exhausting? Where do you stay when you get to the places that you go, that you rest at nighttime? Was there wine involved at the table? Tell me more about that trip.
It's awesome, something I will never forget, the fact that I got to do that with my dad, and actually my younger sister was with us as well, so the three of us did the walk. It's really well managed by the Spanish government, so if anyone ever wants to do something like that, I couldn't recommend it highly enough. So you walk between kind of 10 and 25 kilometres a day, depending on how adventurous you're feeling and how flat the road is. And then you stay in basically hostels, but they're called albergues, and they are supplemented by the government, so they're only for people doing the Camino, and you have to carry a book with you, and that's kind of your passport to the Camino, and you get a stamp at every place you stay along the way. And yes, wine and food were a big part of that walk. Particularly, I remember one place we walked through, and you can only access this monastery via one tiny road or by walking the Camino, and they have a free wine tap on the side of the monastery because they make their own wine, and the wine is free for all people doing the Camino. So the last 5 kilometres that day were quite fun. And so, great bonding experience. We did it kind of pre the advent of smartphones as well, so there wasn't, a lot of time spent uploading photos to Instagram. It was really about the experience of walking and being together.
That's amazing. How you said you were in your 20s when you did that? Mid-20s?
Yes, mid-20s, yeah.
I think that's pretty cool, because mid-20s, you'd be lucky to get any kids that would spend that time, like you said, doing something that didn't involve being close to their smartphones. But just an amazing experience to be together as a family, to be present, and to be doing something like that. I just think that that's a really smart move on your father's behalf, and it doesn't surprise me that you'll never forget it. And I think it's cool, this, I'm sure, was wine back in the day that they just made at the monastery. It didn't have a label. It wasn't particularly well known, but that experience stands out to you, really goes to show about what wine can mean when it's in conjunction with the world around it, I think.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I know that the wine that we drank was not particularly great, but it was made by the monks there for the monastery and for their mass proceedings. So it's kind of lovely that you're in a place where the wine is made, and it's made by, this small monastery there, which is, pretty out of this world kind of experience.
For sure. So you finished up at Charles Sturt. You've done your degree now. What are the next steps? And I ask this question because I know there's lots of people going through their wine degree at the moment, and there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. What was your next steps?
I was lucky enough to have a friend that knew David Lowe in Mudgee, and they hooked me up with David, and I went up there and did vintage. And for anyone who's met David and his partner Kim, there couldn't be two more welcoming people in the wine industry. So I feel quite blessed to have had that experience, that my first vintage was at a place where you felt like you were part of their family. The wines are exceptional, but I just remember lunches together, dinners together, everything was as if you were one of them and always had been, which is really nice. And I don't know that everyone gets that experience when their first foray into the industry. A lot of the time it's usually at bigger places. So I was really blessed to do that. And that was the thing that kind of hooked me on the industry, was that it was about people as much as it was about the product. And They certainly are two great people in this industry. After that, I kind of chased that feeling, just looking for small producers to work for, where I could feel like I was giving as much to them as I could, and that was the start of it.
And what kind of positions do you have when you are just straight out of university? What are some of the jobs that people can expect to be doing?
It's certainly not glamorous. Cleaning, lots of cleaning, cleaning drains, emptying things. It's very dirty work, and particularly when you're first time in a winery, you're basically wet all the time because you're hosing out tanks, you're hosing out presses. There's a lot of grunt work. People probably don't appreciate how kind of agricultural the wine industry is. I think if you're not from this background, you think it's all kind of food grade stainless steel everywhere, and there's really you stand around smelling things, but actually a lot of it is manual labour, and that was actually one of the appeals, was that it was very physical, as well as being about all the beautiful parts of winemaking. Don't go into it thinking that you'll just be standing around a barrel drinking. You will be digging and shoveling and cleaning a lot. Shoveling
sounds scary, because for anyone that watches, any kind of movie, shoveling looks like it's easy, but it's really quite difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. I was pretty fit going into that first vintage, but I think I lost like 9 kilos in 8 weeks, just because you're working that hard, and you're not digging dirt or anything. You're digging grape skins out of the bottom of fermenters and loading them into presses or into other bins. But it's tons and tons of skins that you're doing every day, so it's a lot of work. And generally, when you just started, you don't have much skill beyond just physical labour, so they're the kind of jobs you get allocated quite a lot. It's fun though.
What does it teach you in doing those kind of jobs, though? Do you think that, obviously it's worthwhile, because you have to do that to get to any kind of position where you're actually making decisions on what happens with grapes. But what, out of the cellar hand roles that you had, was there a particular position that really sticks in your mind where you felt like you learnt a lot?
Definitely. One that I always go back to is working for Tom Carson at Yabby Lake. That was the first time seeing someone with as much skill as Tom has, and as much planning and effort he puts into what happens in the winery. It was really nice to work with him, and he's a great wealth of knowledge and an amazing palate. So just kind of watching him work, I'd done a few vintages by that stage, so I knew the ropes, I knew where things needed to be. So the manual labour was pretty easy. It was just more that I fully understood the process, and then watching someone like Tom and the thought he puts into each parcel was really amazing. And that's, I still ask Tom questions of my own wines, and he's a great mentor.
That's pretty cool to hear. I mean, Tom has an amazing reputation, and we all know that he's very knowledgeable, but it's nice to hear that you still speak to him, and that he was, so impressionable at that time. Tell me about your first role as an assistant winemaker. So that was at 10 Minutes by Tractor. So after moving to the Mornington and doing vintage with Tom, me and my wife loved it so much we decided to stay for a year. We ended up staying 8 years, but the first full-time role there was actually in the vineyard at 10 Minutes by Tractor. And then I transferred into the winery after a few months. And that was great. I got to work with some really great people down there, Sandro Moselle and Richard McIntyre, both excellent winemakers. And Sandro particularly was very nice to me. It's hard when you go into that kind of role and you have to make decisions now. Prior to that, everything was decided for you, and you just got to do the work. So it was good. He
gentle with me, and you always make mistakes when you start something new. And I was lucky enough to have him kind of help me through it. And then, being at 10 Minutes by Tractor was great because they have vineyards kind of all over Mornington Peninsula. And so you get to see these completely different parcels grown on different soils, different aspects, quite different trellising systems. So it was kind of a great role to have, working for a place that makes beautiful wines, but also has a diversity of styles.
Yeah, I was thinking that when I was looking at your CV, I was like, man, they really threw you in. And you do have so many opportunities to see, even their sparkling program, all the way to kind of their close planted. I mean, maybe back then they weren't looking at close planted stuff so much. But Sandro, I remember meeting him for the first time as well, and it struck me that he stood in my mind as somebody that seemed to be had a lot of time to talk through processes and wanted to kind of impart, his knowledge to other people. So that's really cool. Tell me about when you started working as a winemaker for hand-picked wines. Did you work with any of the Tasmanian vineyards down there?
Yeah. So I joined them in 2017 at the Mornington site, but that's kind of like the head office for winemaking. So I was there at the time with Peter Dillon and Gary Baldwin. And my role initially was just Mornington, but as it kind of the business grew and Gary had moved on, it kind of transmuted into doing a lot of the Tasmanian wines as well. So we would actually ship the grapes from Tasmania to Mornington for processing at the winery there. So I was lucky enough to go down to Tassie a lot and have a look at the vineyards, and it's a beautiful place. Handpicked is one of those businesses that's probably a little bit misunderstood in that it seems like a very big business, but in fact it's actually quite small. It just makes wine in lots of different places, so it seems like it covers this huge range. But most of the vineyards are small for, particularly for Tasmania now, kind of 5 to 10 hectare blocks, and the same was in Mornington. So it was great to, again, see lots of different sites, but not be making wines on a commercial scale, still trying to make these really high quality wines that were reflective of site.
That's good to know, actually. I mean, it is hard to kind of, unless you have insider knowledge, to work out, who are the big players and who owns what and what do they do. And I've had some amazing Tasmanian Chardonnays from Handpicked recently that were just very transparent of sight. And so it's always nice to hear a little bit more from an insider. Tell me how, after all that time, how Orange came to play, and then how Canobolas Wines has been born.
So we always actually, me and my wife had intended to come back to New South Wales, and it wasn't necessarily just Orange, but so we moved to Mornington with the plan to stay a year, and then stayed 8, and then kind of during COVID with all the lockdowns, we started to have a think about what we wanted to do long term, and always wanted to have our own brand and our own wines, and had always loved the Chardonnay from Orange. So that was the big draw card for coming here, was that, one, I wanted to come back to New South Wales, but I had to go to a place where I thought the Chardonnays were exceptional, and that was Orange to the T. And then spent some time looking around, and then spoke to a mate, Will Gilbert, from Gilbert Wines, who's in Mudgee, but buys a lot of fruit from Orange, and he had told me that this site, Canobolas Smith, was for sale. And it's a small vineyard, and it does have a great history in Orange, but it's not really well known outside of Orange and or Sydney, in that Murray, the old owner, was the third person to plant vines in Orange, and quite an eccentric character. So if you knew him, you'd know him well, but he didn't go out into the trade at all. He expected people to come here. He made very intense and long-lived wines, but never really hit the mainstream. So that was, it was lucky that he wanted to sell to someone like us that was looking to live and work on the site. We live on the vineyard and the winery is here as well. So I know he had opportunity to sell to a lot of people before us, and he was waiting for someone to kind of continue his dream for the site.
It's interesting to, I think, hear that kind of history. I was familiar with a couple of bottles of Canobolas Smith. I remember the labels particularly. And, you know, want to do your own thing, but then to come into a story that's already been established, you can see how it would mean so much to him. How do you go about recreating your own story, but still paying homage to what's come before?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get asked that quite a bit because the people who know Murray's wines and love them, they love everything about them. And stylistically, our Chardonnays are quite different. Murray made very ripe, rich style with a fair use of oak, and I actually quite like the opposite. I like things that are vibrant and fresh and linear, and I think oak should be a supporting structure for Chardonnay, not necessarily the first or the last thing you see, but just this kind of seamless integration of oak throughout the wine. So the styles are really different, and that's been a bit of an adjustment. The red wines he made are very similar to the style I like, in that they actually are quite ethereal and vibrant and have all those kind of touch points that I like to drink. So we haven't really changed much there. The big change has been the style of Chardonnay, and it's probably just modernising it a bit, but also, putting our stamp on it. So that it's gone down well. The reviews for it have been very good, and the people who have come back to try it can see the site in the wine still. You know, we're not trying to completely change it, but they're both beautiful styles, but certainly there's been a change into this kind of more fresher, vibrant Chardonnay.
Well, it certainly is that, and probably one of the highlights of my year last year was tasting the 22 Chardonnay. It blew my mind how mineral that wine is, and I hate using that term because it really doesn't tell you anything, but it had this amazing linear, crunchy citrus fruit, but I could just taste like pumice stone and like chalkboard dust, and it was crazy to me, and I sipped over it and my mind just boggled. So an amazing wine to be produced, especially seeing as you launched in 2022?
That was our first wine, yeah.
That's just boggles the mind. Tell me a little bit about when you first went in and you started looking at the vines and what you had. Did you make any big changes out in the vineyard? Did you keep everything the same? What was the process there?
The vineyard was in pretty good condition. Murray had stopped making wine in 2015, but he'd been still selling the grapes to other wine producers. We came in and switched to organics immediately, so the site has been run organically since the start of 2022, and then just put a lot more effort back into the vineyard. Murray was, as happens with all winemakers, time was catching up with him, and the energy to do the manual labour in the vineyard starts to wane once you're kind of 60, 65, so it just needed a fresh set of hands to come in and do some grunt work. I had done some training there's some new, not that new anymore, but there's a pruning system called Poussard pruning or Simonade search. And so we've converted the vineyard over to this style of pruning, which is all about kind of creating longevity in the vineyard, and sap flow is really important, and how do you get the best out of the vines over a really long period of time rather than just each vintage. So that's been a big focus for us, is putting energy back into the vines, and they've rewarded us a lot. The 22s were awesome to start, but 23 and 24, in my opinion, are better wines. And I think, the site will only continue to evolve and get better. The organics part of the conversation is it's just better for people to work in a place where herbicides and pesticides aren't sprayed, and no one can really refute that. We haven't done any certification. I don't know if I will, but the site is run organically because I work in it, and I don't want to work in a place where chemicals have been used to kill things. So it's all about life in the vineyard, and we do a lot of stuff to make sure that there's lots of different species of grasses and clovers and medics to bring about natural biodiversity within the vineyard. And that also kind of works into the organics in that if you create competition, you don't actually need to use a lot of heavy chemicals. So that's the big changes here.
Wonderful. And you answered my question on whether you would go down the certified route. We know that is a very long, arduous process, so we can talk later about what your decision is on that point. Tell me a little bit about the vineyard. How high do you sit? And tell me a little bit about the soil profile and orientation.
So we're at 820 metres above sea level here, which is, it's very high in the Australian context. The region goes up to about 1,100 metres and is the only region in Australia defined by altitude in that you can't plant below 600 metres. So all the vines here would be considered high altitude, but we're at 820 metres. And the part of the mountain that we are on is one of the most recent lava flows, and it's about 11 million years old. And the soil here, this was the big draw card for me to Orange, was that the soils here are very unique and very deep. We have red ferrosol, which is an iron-rich soil across the whole vineyard, and in parts of the vineyard we've dug 2.5 metres and further, and we still haven't hit any rocks. So there's potentially 4 or 5 metres of topsoil, which in Australia is almost unheard of, particularly with how old the continent is. Generally, soil profiles are about 80 to 100 centimetres would be a good topsoil. So we're at least 2.5 metres, and I don't have a machine that can dig further than that. So that's kind of as much as I know. There is, throughout the vineyard, varying composition of soil. There is some parts where there's some broken basalt and a little bit of quartz as well. Orange is really unique. There are lots of different soil types here because of the volcano that Mount Canobolas was. And we're on this beautiful strip of red dirt that is very close, tucked into kind of the shoulder of the volcano.
And was your inspiration behind the labels did that colour come from the soils? When I first, it was interesting to me. I was like, what is this brand going to look like? And that colour is so rich and you almost want to eat it, the label. Where did the inspiration come from? Yes, definitely drew inspiration from the colour soils. You alluded earlier to the old labels, which for anyone who hasn't seen them, were this gaudy blue and gold colour. And so we wanted to take some elements out of that without taking that blue gold character. So on the old label, there was stars and the moonscape, and there was the mountain, Mount Canobolas, which is, the most prominent feature in Orange. That were kind of the three things we wanted to keep. So we've got a die cut at the bottom of the label, which is the shape of Mount Canobolas. The soil is this red. It's that terracotta red soil. That's the colour of the label. And then the stars on the label, that is the constellation that was above the mountain at midnight on the day we bought the property. So kind of captured in time the moment in which the property became ours. Oh, that's really cool. I'm glad to hear that. They are beautiful and classy, very classy, I have to say. But I really love hearing the story about how they're formed, because I know that, it's your baby, so you put a lot of effort and thought into it. What is next for Canobolas Wines? Are you planning on making more bottlings? Are you staying with what you've got? What's next for you?
We won't get too much bigger, so we're about 6 hectares at the moment, and we've got 2 more hectares planned. We actually planted some gamay last year, there's a few people kind of looking at that in the region. I think it'll do quite well. We do have a little bit of Pinot Noir on this site, but I'm not sure it's the right site for Pinot, so I actually use that to make our rosé. But in the future, that will be replaced by either Gamay or Cabernet Franc, which, if you've ever had Cab Franc from Orange, it's vastly underrated and amazing wines. So that's probably the only changes. We'll stick to Chardonnay. That's our main production. That's about 2/3 of what we make. So that'll still be the core of what Canobolas is about. And then, a bit of Gamay and some more Cabernet Franc. That's where we're headed.
It sounds like it all is very suitable for where you are, and also owed to what's been planted and what's come before. I'm astounded that it looks like there's still some of the 2022 Chardonnay available on your website, which baffles my mind, but also a nice thing, I suppose, as well. I always like to ask, if you could only drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, John, what would they be and why?
Great question. Probably harder question to answer than you would think. Everything I like about wine, I like about in my other drinks as well. So freshness, vibrancy, balance. So whiskey sour definitely would be there for me. And then maybe place as well. Whiskey sour at a bar in the city with my wife, that'd be really great. It's got that perfect kind of blend of sweet and sour. You've got this lovely mouthfeel from egg whites that are in there, and a bit of sweetness from the sugar. That's a really great drink. Chardonnay, of course, without doubt. Do I get to choose one Chardonnay? 2017 Pierre-Yves Colin-Marais Pellini La Folletieres is probably the best white wine and maybe the best wine I've ever had in my life.
17's great.
Yes, so if I could drink that forever, I'd be pretty happy. And then beyond that, maybe just a beer at the pub, like a pretty standard tap beer with some mates, packet of Smith's Crisps open, just chatting and talking about life. That'd be up there definitely with one of the best drinks you can have.
I love that. You've covered all your bases, something with your wife, something with your mates, and then a nice, snobby wine that nobody can buy. It's fantastic.
Yeah. I've got one bottle in the cellar, so I'll share it with you one time. How about that?
No way. No, you share that with your wife or I'll be in big trouble. John, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you. When you said you were going to have some beers and a packet, I thought you were about to say a packet of ciggies, but I'm so glad that you said a packet of Smith's. A nice packet of crisps is a much better option. I am loving what you're doing. I'm blown away that they are the first release of your wines. I am so excited of what's to come, and I think you're doing wonderful things out there in Orange. Your name is a name that is constantly passed along when people talk about somebody that is very community orientated and willing to give anybody a go. And I think that's a pretty nice thing to hear along the traps. So thank you for making the time today, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your wines soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me on.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.